Welcome to a pulse-pounding adventure set in the heart of Atlantic City, where the glitz of neon lights meets the roar of a notorious biker gang. In our story, a seemingly unassuming waitress named Caroline turns out to be much more than anyone could have imagined. When the Steel Fangs barge into the Beau Fortune casino, harassing patrons and intimidating staff, Carolyn finds herself forced to reveal a past she had hoped to leave behind. Brace yourself for an astonishing showdown where high-stakes gambling collides with explosive street brawls, and discover how one woman stands against overwhelming odds to defend the people she cares about. If you're curious to witness Caroline's remarkable transformation from calm server to unstoppable force, stick around for the full story. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world, and it ensures we can keep bringing you more action-packed, unforgettable tales. Atlantic City was known for its dazzling lights, bustling boardwalk, and the hypnotic jingle-jangle of slot machines that echoed through its many casinos. On most evenings, the place exuded an almost carnivalesque atmosphere. Tourists grinned ear to ear as they clutched their oversized margaritas. High rollers hovered over velvet-covered blackjack tables, and wide-eyed dreamers fed coins into machines named after every possible theme under the sun. Amid this vivid tableau stood the Beau Fortune Casino, neither the largest nor the most lavish in town, but certainly one that held its own in terms of history and charm. The neon sign outside flickered invitingly, casting long shadows on the sidewalk, where curious visitors lingered before stepping in. Golden doors swung open to reveal the hum of conversation, the soft clink of glasses, and the gentle ring of digital jackpots. Working the night shift at the Beau Fortune was Caroline, a waitress in her mid-30s who had become something of a fixture there over the past year. While new hires came and went, often dazzled or overwhelmed by the casino's late-night lifestyle, Caroline seemed unflappably calm. Night after night, she donned her neatly pressed uniform, pinned back her warm chestnut hair, and glided between tables with effortless poise. Patrons and colleagues alike saw her as professional, courteous, and attentive, qualities one would expect from any top-tier waitress in a place that catered to high expectations. She took orders with a friendly but reserved smile, never prying into her customers' business, but always ready to lend an ear if they needed a sympathetic listener. Most people who met Caroline assumed she was just a quiet woman making ends meet. Yet those who spent a bit more time with her might notice certain intriguing details. She seemed to move with a fluid, almost feline grace, never bumping into a chair or table, never dropping a single tray no matter how crowded the room became. On slow nights, she slipped out to the staff locker room to stretch, running through a series of carefully practiced movements that vaguely resembled martial arts forms. And if pressed gently about her past, perhaps in the midst of a friendly chat during a break, she would speak only in hints and half-finished sentences. "I used to have a different job before," she might say with the briefest of smiles. "It taught me a few things about handling tense situations." Despite her understated demeanor, Caroline's presence offered a subtle reassurance to her fellow employees. From the flamboyant blackjack dealer in his glittering vest to the security guard seated in front of a bank of CCTV monitors, everyone came to respect Caroline's quiet confidence. They might tease her that she was the cool older sister of the staff, or that if things ever went south in the casino, she'd be the one to handle it. She usually just laughed along at such jokes. There was no need to reveal her entire history, no need to show that beneath her calm exterior lay a skill set earned from grueling years on a tactical team. The quiet undercurrent of her competence was rarely tested. Atlantic City, for all its bright lights and occasional bouts of rowdiness, had been relatively tame these past months. Yes, you'd get your usual disputes over a lost bet or an overly enthusiastic drunk now and then, but the casino's security was quick to intervene, and Caroline never found it necessary to do more than politely usher patrons to the exit if they grew loud. Little did anyone know, however, that an altogether different, far more dangerous challenge was about to arrive in town. The fragile peace of Atlantic City and the tranquil mask of Caroline's new life would soon be threatened by a group of bikers who believed they could push anyone around. They were wrong, and they had no idea just how wrong they were about to be. While Caroline delivered drinks and brought out trays of appetizers in the Beau Fortune Casino, news reports on local stations began whispering about a roving biker group rumored to have business in various parts of New Jersey. Fragments of these rumors floated from TV screens mounted in the bar area, or from casual chatter among the casino's clientele. The talk was never definitive, just bits and pieces. A violent confrontation at a roadside diner on the outskirts of town, extortion threats aimed at small businesses a few miles off the main highway, and sightings of intimidating men clad in leather vests speeding down coastal roads. Nothing had directly pointed to Atlantic City yet, and if the bikers had visited the famous boardwalk recently, they'd certainly kept a low profile. Caroline paid only minimal attention to these rumors at first. Working near slot machines and card tables inevitably meant overhearing all kinds of dramatic stories, some plausible, others fanciful. The city itself had always attracted a range of characters, from harmless drifters to suspicious entrepreneurs hawking too-good-to-be-true schemes. Local authorities were typically vigilant. The Atlantic City Police Department was well-staffed, and the casinos employed robust security measures. If a group of troublemakers wanted to stir up chaos, surely they would think twice before targeting a place so heavily monitored. Besides, as far as anyone could tell, these bikers were more of a nuisance than a serious organized threat. But trouble has a way of surfacing precisely where it is least desired. The first real sign that the city might be in for more than it bargained for came when a pair of lean, surly men, sporting matching patches on their leather jackets, slunk into the Beau Fortune Casino one late afternoon. They navigated the gaming floor with a swagger that seemed designed to unnerve, though few patrons paid them any mind. It was still early, and the casino wasn't at full capacity yet. Carolyn watched them out of the corner of her eye while wiping down a table. She couldn't make out the exact details on their patches, but she did notice the men scanning the surroundings as though they were sizing up potential marks or evaluating security. A pang of unease tugged at her instincts. She had learned in her previous line of work to trust that kind of sixth sense, a nearly imperceptible internal alarm that told her something was off. Still, the men didn't do anything overtly threatening. They ordered a couple of beers at the bar, downed them quickly, and disappeared just as quietly as they had arrived. Later that evening, security staff mentioned they thought the two men might have been part of a known biker club. There was some half-hearted speculation about whether the group was scoping out the casino as a potential site for card scams or money laundering, but no confrontation had occurred. For now, it was just talk. Yet Caroline felt a faint tension seeping into the air around the Beau Fortune. She caught glimpses of local news reports highlighting increased police presence in certain areas of Atlantic City. A bartender from across town told her of drunken arguments with bikers who bragged about taking over the local scene. On her lunch break, she overheard phone conversations in the staff lounge about a possible crackdown on illegal arms dealing rumored along the coast. She could sense all the disparate pieces swirling into something larger, like small storm clouds converging, hinting at a tempest. Caroline tried to shake off the worry. She was here simply to work and lead a quiet life, away from the adrenaline-fueled chaos that had once defined her career. However, the more she tried to convince herself everything was fine, the more a lingering intuition whispered that soon she'd have to confront whatever trouble came through those golden casino doors. And for the sake of the innocence around her, it might be time to mentally prepare, just in case. The real commotion began on a Friday night, just as the Beau Fortune hit its usual weekend stride. High rollers made their entrances in tailored suits, couples posed for selfies by the ornate fountain near the main entrance, and the machines chimed in a relentless chorus of neon jubilation. Around 10 p.m., Caroline was ferrying a tray of cocktails toward a group of lively poker players when she noticed a distinct shift in the atmosphere. A crescendo of revving engines outside preceded a dozen or so bikers strolling in as if they owned the place. They wore matching jackets emblazoned with the emblem of a snarling wolf, teeth bared, and the phrase "steel fangs" curving beneath it in aggressive lettering. Most people carried on at first, too immersed in their gambling or socializing to pay close attention to a group of rowdy-looking newcomers. But Caroline's senses went on alert. Each member of the Steel Fangs exuded an air of intimidation, from their stony glares to the way they seemed to survey the entire casino. Whispers rippled through the staff about who these people might be. Even the floor manager, who usually faced any challenge with a forced grin, exchanged uneasy glances with the pit bosses. Security wasn't immediately alarmed, but they maintained a watchful stance from their station by the slot machines. Caroline felt a tightening in her chest as she set her tray down on a nearby table. A tall, broad-shouldered biker with a shaved head locked eyes with her. He smirked and made a crude comment to one of his companions, eliciting a low chuckle. She forced a polite half-smile out of sheer professionalism and turned to leave. But before she could take 2 steps, another member of the crew, an imposing man with a dark beard, stepped forward and blocked her path. He leaned in slightly, the overpowering smell of leather, sweat, and whiskey washing over her. "Hey there," he drawled, voice dripping with a mix of flirtation and menace. "How about you bring us some top-shelf whiskey, sweetheart? And don't skimp on the glasses. We're celebrating tonight." She nodded, keeping her tone as level as possible. "Right away, sir. I'll be back with your drinks in just a moment." Waitress. The man's mouth curled into something resembling a sneer, but Caroline didn't linger long enough to decipher his expression. She slid past him and headed straight for the bar area, where a couple of her co-workers were stocking shelves. Her mind raced. It was obvious these bikers intended to throw their weight around, but the question was how far they would go. No one had been outright assaulted, yet. Still, from the glances and smirks they exchanged, Caroline suspected they didn't come here just to gamble. During her SWAT days, she'd studied hundreds of criminals, and one universal trait was the game of power posturing. These bikers would test the casino's boundaries, see how security responded, and if they faced no immediate opposition, they'd ramp up their tactics. She could almost feel the tension rising like heat from a furnace. Back at the bar, she whispered to the bartender to prepare a round of premium whiskey shots. She also discreetly asked him to alert security for backup if the men became aggressive. For a moment, she considered if it would be wise to simply let security handle the situation, but something told her this might escalate beyond what standard staff could manage. She wasn't sure what shape that escalation would take, whether it would just be rough language, intimidation, or outright violence. But her instincts told her to be prepared. Leaving the bar, she returned to the group with a practiced smile and a tray laden with top-shelf whiskey. As she distributed the glasses, she felt a prickle of hostility from the men's stares. One of them leaned in, muttering something beneath his breath about pushing out the old guard in this city. Caroline pretended not to hear. Yet a quiet voice in her head reminded her that, under normal circumstances, civilians had to rely on the police for protection. But these men gave off a vibe that said they weren't afraid of the authorities. They might even relish the challenge. And that left the waitresses, dealers, and patrons of the Beau Fortune Casino in a precarious position. Little did the bikers know, however, that one particular waitress had the capacity to become their worst nightmare if they forced her hand. Within an hour of their arrival, the Steel Fangs had thoroughly made themselves at home. They commandeered several tables near the middle of the casino floor, barking for more drinks, causing minor disruptions at the slot machines, and casting threatening glances at any patron who dared look their way too long. Their leader, a man called Vance, identifiable by a large patch on his vest that read President, ordered round after round of top-shelf liquor. Whenever staff tried to suggest that the group had perhaps imbibed enough, Vance shot them a glare that could freeze lava. Caroline watched all this from the periphery, carrying out her usual duties with mechanical precision, but her mind was in overdrive. Memories of old operations and strategic takedowns flickered through her thoughts. Back in her SWAT days, she had been taught the importance of conflict de-escalation, but also the necessity of swift, decisive action when push came to shove. If the Steel Fangs were testing boundaries, the best approach might be a strong initial show of authority to prevent them from thinking the casino was an easy target. However, in a civilian environment, everything was more complicated. She couldn't just flip the switch and turn into a tactically armed operative, especially with so many innocent bystanders around. Things took a more sinister turn when Vance decided to single out Caroline. Perhaps he sensed there was something different about her, some quiet confidence that irked him. Or maybe he just wanted a victim for the sake of establishing dominance. One moment she was clearing empty glasses from a nearby table. The next she felt a rough hand grasp her wrist. "Hey, you," Vance slurred, his eyes bloodshot from whiskey. "We want another round, and we want it now. You hear me?" Caroline kept her expression as neutral as possible, ignoring the twinge of discomfort in her arm. "Of course, sir," she replied evenly. But it might be time for some water, too. You've had quite a few drinks already. Several of the bikers barked out mocking laughter. Look at that, one of them jeered. We got ourselves a nursemaid here. She thinks we can't handle our liquor. Vance tightened his grip before releasing her with a shove that caused her to stagger a step backward. Get us the drinks, he snarled. No more lip. For a split second, Caroline felt the old SWAT instincts flare. If this had been a hostile situation in her past life, she would have reacted instantly. But years of training in civilian settings and conflict resolution kept her reined in. She simply nodded and began to move away. Yet as she turned, she locked eyes with the casino's head of security, a stocky man named Griffin, who was stationed near the bar. He appeared ready to intervene but also uncertain. These bikers were more numerous and menacing than your average rowdy patron. Caroline subtly shook her head, signaling him to wait. If Griffin escalated things too soon, the bikers might lash out violently in a crowded area. Vance's gaze followed her the entire way to the bar. Caroline could sense his malice like a noxious cloud creeping in her direction. She also sensed something deeper, maybe an anger that extended far beyond just wanting to cause chaos. The Steel Fangs likely had bigger fish to fry than harassing a waitress, but tonight she was the unfortunate object of their intimidation tactics. Despite the knots in her stomach, she told herself to remain composed. If push truly came to shove, she had a few aces up her sleeve. But for now, she had to focus on protecting the staff and patrons. The time for revealing her capabilities would come soon enough. As the night wore on, the Steel Fangs only grew bolder. They spread out across the casino floor, interrupting games, tossing chips around carelessly, and occasionally launching into rowdy outbursts whenever they lost a hand. A few unlucky tourists received harsh shoves or crude insults if they got in the bikers' way. But it was Caroline who seemed to remain in their crosshairs. Each time she passed by to offer drinks or clear a table, one of them would make a pointed comment about her looks, or else try to trip her up with a strategically placed boot. Their catcalls and leers escalated from borderline obnoxious to overtly threatening. Caroline navigated the floor with a steady calm that belied the adrenaline surging through her. There were moments when she desperately wanted to snap, to show these bullies exactly who they were dealing with. But such impulses needed to be controlled. Years ago, during her SWAT tenure, she'd operated under the motto, protect and preserve. Even though she was no longer in uniform, the same principle applied. She had to ensure the safety of everyone around her, which meant avoiding a full-blown confrontation on a crowded casino floor, if at all possible. During a brief lull, she found herself in the staff locker room under the guise of retrieving some fresh napkins. In truth, it was an excuse to gather herself. She stood in front of the mirror, taking slow, deliberate breaths. Caroline's reflection revealed nothing overtly special. Just a woman with a determined gaze, hair slightly disheveled from the hustle, and a flush of exertion on her cheeks. But behind those eyes were years of training, hostage negotiations, tactical maneuvers, crowd control. The throbbing pulse in her temple reminded her that controlling a situation didn't always mean pulling a trigger. Sometimes it required outsmarting your opponents. She quickly opened her locker and reached into her bag. Nestled among her personal belongings was an item she hadn't needed in a long time. A small, discreet communication earpiece. She'd modified it during her SWAT days to pick up local police frequencies, a habit she'd never entirely let go of when she moved to Atlantic City. Tonight, with an impending sense of dread thickening in the air, she decided it was time to wear it once more, hidden beneath her hair, invisible to casual onlookers. She had no intention of playing vigilante, but it would help if she could monitor police dispatch in real time should the bikers escalate beyond mere threats. Returning to the casino floor, Caroline maintained her outward composure. She resumed her rounds, offering friendly greetings to regulars, refilling drinks for players who seemed oblivious to the tension. Yet in her ear, a faint crackle of static occasionally burst into snippets of police chatter. So far, no direct mention of trouble at the Beaufort Inn. That was good news, but she knew it could change in an instant. One by one, she subtly checked in with her coworkers. She told the cocktail waitress, Linda, to steer clear of the bikers' territory. She quietly advised a rookie security guard to keep an eye on the men's body language. If they shifted from intimidation to actual violence, there would be signals. Clenched fists, sudden quiet, or a surge of coordinated movement. In the meantime, Caroline readied herself. If the Steel Fangs intended to claim the casino as their personal playground, they'd soon discover that beneath her mild manner lay a formidable opponent willing to use every ounce of her skill to protect innocent lives. The bikers' disruption carried on past midnight, causing the usual energetic pulse of the casino to take on a jittery edge. Vance and a handful of his senior associates seemed primarily focused on harassing staff and flaunting a sense of immunity to consequences. They tossed bills at croupiers, demanding special treatment, and sneered whenever security personnel dared to remind them of house rules. Meanwhile, some of the younger, more restless members drifted toward darker corners of the casino, possibly scouting for vulnerabilities or potential backdoors. In Caroline's estimation, these movements reeked of more than mere bravado. They suggested a methodical approach to infiltration. Between drink deliveries, Caroline took mental notes of the group's structure. She identified at least 3 individuals who appeared to hold leadership roles besides Vance. They delegated tasks to the rest or commanded them to remain in certain areas. One man, sporting a sleeve of tattoos that told a tale of prison time, appeared particularly interested in the security cameras. He glanced up at them repeatedly, as if measuring blind spots or analyzing rotation intervals. Another, a wiry figure with greasy blonde hair, kept retreating to the outskirts where he would talk on a cell phone. Caroline suspected they were coordinating with someone else off-site, perhaps waiting for a signal or an opportune moment to act. Caroline had no official standing here. She was just a waitress, at least as far as the bikers knew. But that was an advantage. She drifted across the casino floor as she normally would, blending into the background of rattling dice and flashing lights. Whenever she spotted a group of bikers convening, she made sure to pass by, eavesdropping on stray bits of conversation. She was careful never to linger or make direct eye contact, just a server delivering drinks, ignoring the customers' scowls. To the casual observer, she was simply performing her job. In reality, she was gathering reconnaissance, gleaning hints about what the Steel Fangs planned, noting their numbers, and analyzing their personalities. At one point, she nearly collided with Griffin, the head of security. He stepped aside in a hurry, whispering, "They're definitely sizing us up. We've got off-duty cops on standby outside, but we don't want a firefight in here." Caroline nodded. "I understand. Keep them at a distance if you can. Try not to provoke them." Griffin studied her face as if searching for signs of fear, and found none. He gave a curt nod before slipping away, presumably to coordinate with the rest of his team. A short while later, Caroline felt her earpiece crackle. The words were faint, but she caught mention of a call for backup near the Beau Fortune. Her heart skipped a beat. Someone, maybe a patron or a worried staff member, had tipped off the police. She quietly maneuvered closer to a quieter spot near a bank of out-of-order slot machines to listen more intently. The dispatcher reported that multiple complaints had come in describing a large group of bikers harassing guests, with potential threats of violence. Patrol units were en route, but due to the usual weekend bustle, the response might be delayed. Caroline felt a flicker of relief tempered by anxiety. At least the authorities were aware something was amiss. But time was ticking, and a delayed response could mean the difference between a contained situation and a full-blown crisis. She recalled how swiftly the tide could turn in these scenarios. One ill-timed shove, one foolish provocation, and the entire casino could erupt into chaos. In that instant, Caroline realized she might need to act preemptively. She slipped into a side corridor, where the noise died down to a dull roar, her mind racing with possible strategies. Maybe she could coordinate with Griffin, or isolate the bikers' leadership in a less crowded area, or even feign compliance to diffuse tensions until backup arrived. This wasn't just about proving she could handle a threat. It was about safeguarding the people who had become her second family. The dealers, the bartenders, the jovial regulars who always gave her a friendly nod. None of them deserved to be terrorized. If the Steel Fangs insisted on a fight, well, then they would face the full weight of her training. Little did they know that the quiet waitress with the calm eyes had once been one of the finest SWAT operatives in the region, and she was done letting bullies have free rein. Caroline worked quickly to put a plan in motion. She didn't want to alarm her coworkers, so she approached them individually under various pretenses, refilling a water pitcher for the bartender, asking the pit boss about chip inventories, or providing fresh linens to the front desk staff. In hushed tones, she directed them to subtly guide customers away from the bikers' sphere of influence. If any guest seemed unsettled by the steel fangs, staff would encourage them to move to a different section of the casino, all under the guise of offering a quieter, more luxurious experience. In this way, Caroline hoped to thin the crowd around the rowdy gang, leaving them more isolated and reducing the risk to innocent bystanders. Meanwhile, she coordinated discreetly with Griffin. He had managed to post additional security guards at key exits, giving them earpieces to communicate in case the bikers attempted an aggressive move or tried to block off an entrance. The guards checked that the locked emergency exits were in working order and that any route leading to private areas, employee lounges, vault rooms, or high-stakes zones remained secure. Though it wasn't a full lockdown, it was enough to limit the bikers' mobility without raising their suspicions too dramatically. But Caroline's most crucial undertaking was identifying a strategic point within the casino for a potential confrontation. Drawing upon her SWAT experience, she recognized the importance of funneling threats into an area that provided her team with defensive advantage while minimizing collateral damage. After some careful assessment, she settled on a section near the north side of the gaming floor, where decorative pillars and large slot machines formed a natural choke point. The overhead cameras offered decent coverage, and there were fewer fragile fixtures that could turn into dangerous shrapnel if fists or bullets started flying. Under normal circumstances, it would have been best to wait for law enforcement's arrival and let them handle the situation. But the earpiece chatter indicated the police were still tied up with other incidents around town. Car accidents on the main highway, a disturbance at another casino, and typical weekend night chaos. Caroline understood that when they finally arrived, they'd be expecting a high-risk scenario. Her aim was to ensure that if or when the steel fangs decided to escalate, the staff at the Beau Fortune would have the upper hand. She also quietly warned her friend Linda. "If things start looking bad," she said with a gentle squeeze of Linda's arm, "get to the staff exit near the kitchen and head downstairs. You'll be safe there." Linda's eyes widened, but she nodded, trusting Caroline's calm demeanor over any creeping fear. The rest of the employees picked up on the undercurrent of tension and followed suit, moving as if choreographed by an invisible hand. Soon, a sizable portion of the guests, those unaware of the danger, began drifting toward the far end of the casino where some new promotion was drawing their attention. With the main floor less crowded, the bikers were running out of easy targets to intimidate. Vance, sensing a change in the crowd's composition, turned to Caroline with a sneer. "What's happening here, Waitress?" he demanded. "Where's everyone going?" Caroline feigned ignorance, offering him a polite shrug. "There's a new game in the Diamond Hall," she said, gesturing vaguely to the back. "Free spins, that kind of thing. People love freebies." Vance eyed her suspiciously, but the next moment, one of his cronies tapped him on the shoulder to point out an approaching security guard, presumably requesting them to tone it down. They turned their attention away from Caroline to focus on the guard, giving her a precious moment to slip out of sight once more. She took the opportunity to check her earpiece again. The police were still at least 15 minutes away, maybe more, depending on traffic. Caroline's pulse thrummed with a quiet intensity. She had to hope that in the interim, she could keep the bikers contained, because if they decided to get violent, she might have no choice but to intervene directly, revealing exactly who she was and what she was capable of. The tipping point came when one of the younger bikers, presumably hopped up on booze and bravado, decided to slam his fist onto a blackjack table, scattering chips everywhere and prompting frightened yelps from nearby patrons. When the dealer tried to calmly explain the rules and the fact that the outburst wouldn't be tolerated, the biker lunged at him. In an instant, security guards rushed forward, urging him to back down. Yet the man just sneered, pushing the dealer aside and swinging at the first guard with a vicious right hook. Chaos erupted, chairs toppled, and a crescendo of alarmed gasps rippled through the crowd. Sensing the moment had come, Vance and the other senior members of the Steel Fangs joined in, forming a menacing front that dared anyone to stand against them. Caroline, who had been blending into the nearby throng of onlookers, saw the situation unraveling far too quickly. The bikers were blocking each other's flanks, forming a rough semicircle that pushed security guards onto the defensive. Griffin and two other guards tried to intervene with hand-to-hand techniques they'd learned in basic training, but they were outnumbered and facing opponents who thrived on brawls. The steel fangs roared with savage glee, certain that these rent-a-cops had no chance against them. But they hadn't accounted for Caroline. She slipped behind a pillar, her heart pounding. In one swift motion, she unbuttoned the top of her uniform blouse enough to free her arms for a broader range of movement. Then she picked up a short baton she'd stashed earlier behind the pillar, a remnant from her SWAT kit. The subtle modifications she'd made allowed it to collapse and extend silently. She inhaled once, deeply, and stepped into the fray. The first biker she encountered was a burly man towering over a security guard, fist raised to strike. Caroline tapped him on the shoulder. He turned, confusion in his eyes, only to be met by a precise snap of the baton against his wrist. He howled in pain, dropping the guard to the floor. Before he could retaliate, she delivered a swift elbow to his jaw, sending him staggering. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Who was this waitress moving like a trained operative? Realizing one of their own had been taken down by a woman half his size, two more bikers charged at Caroline. She sidestepped the first, hooking her foot behind his ankle to trip him. As he stumbled forward, she followed up with a baton strike to the back of his knee, forcing him onto all fours. The second biker swung at her with a wild punch, but Caroline deflected it with her forearm, pivoting to deliver a knee strike to his midsection. He crumpled, wheezing, disbelief etched across his face. The scene exploded into a full-blown melee. Some casino patrons fled screaming, while others cowered behind slot machines. A few braver souls pulled out cell phones to film the fight, capturing footage that would later light up social media with shock and awe. Griffin, momentarily stunned by Caroline's expertise, rallied his guards to isolate the bikers. They formed a loose perimeter, trying to direct the brawl away from civilians. Still, the Steel Fangs were skilled street fighters, and they rallied behind Vance, who locked eyes with Caroline. "Who the hell are you?" he snarled, flicking the blood off his lip, where she'd already landed a glancing blow. His eyes blazed with a mix of fury and newfound respect. No one had ever bested multiple members of his crew so swiftly. Caroline gripped her baton, her voice steady despite the adrenaline roaring in her veins. "Just a waitress," she said dryly. She recognized the look in his eyes. He was a predator cornered, and cornered predators were the most dangerous. Around them, chaos reigned. Broken glass littered the floor, frightened gamblers rushed to evacuate, and security guards grappled with the bikers' lesser members. Vance lunged, aiming a haymaker that could have knocked out an average fighter. Caroline dodged, narrowly avoiding a second blow. She pivoted and aimed a baton strike at his midsection, but he caught it, gripping the baton with surprising strength. For a heartbeat, they locked in a stalemate, each pushing back against the other's force. He tried to yank the baton free, but she maintained a firm hold, using his momentum against him by twisting and driving her shoulder into his chest. He staggered but quickly regained his footing, launching into a barrage of punches that she parried, albeit with difficulty. Somewhere in the background, sirens wailed, signaling that the cavalry was at last on its way. But the battle's decisive moment was unfolding right here, right now, between Caroline and Vance. He connected a glancing punch across her cheek, sending a sharp sting of pain through her jaw. Caroline tasted blood but kept her focus. She feinted left, drawing him off balance, then slipped behind him, hooking one arm around his neck in a flash of lethal efficiency. In her SWAT days, it was a textbook maneuver designed to incapacitate suspects quickly. For a few seconds, Vance writhed in her grip, raging, refusing to submit. Then, with a final twist, Caroline tightened her hold just enough to force compliance without permanent harm. Vance's knees buckled. The roar in his throat died to a rasp. He tapped his hand frantically against her arm, choking. "All right, enough," he gasped. Caroline released him, leaving him to slump onto the floor, gasping for air. All around them, the bikers who were still standing froze at the sight of their leader brought to his knees by a woman they'd mocked mere minutes ago. Their faces ran the gamut of emotions: shock, fear, even reluctant admiration. Before any of them could gather their wits to retaliate, the echo of police sirens crescendoed, and uniformed officers burst into the casino, guns drawn, demanding everyone freeze. What they found was an unlikely scene: battered bikers, stunned security guards, and a waitress standing tall with a baton in hand and fierce determination shining in her eyes. The arrival of the police put an abrupt end to the madness. Lights flashed red and blue through the glass entrance as officers poured into the Beau Fortune, shouting commands over the ringing in everyone's ears. Security and bystanders alike moved aside, letting the law take control. Caroline, bruised and breathing heavily, stepped away from Vance's wheezing form and carefully dropped her baton. She raised her hands in a universal gesture of surrender, anticipating that the cops would have questions. Lots of questions. Uniformed officers swarmed the steel fangs, forcing them face down onto the floor and slapping cuffs around their wrists. Several of the bikers hurled curses and threats, but the fight had drained out of them. They watched, seething, as a couple of paramedics arrived to tend to those who had been injured. Casino staff, though shaken, emerged from their hiding places to guide the medics where they were most needed. One officer, a middle-aged detective with graying hair at his temples, approached Caroline cautiously. He looked her up and down. The disheveled uniform, the slight swelling on her cheek, the trembling in her fingers that betrayed the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, voice laced with concern. Caroline nodded, lowering her hands. "I'm fine," she managed, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I used to work in a field that trained me for situations like this." She wasn't sure how much to reveal, but it felt pointless to hide her background entirely. The detective raised an eyebrow, curiosity plainly etched on his face, but decided not to press for details at that moment. Instead, he thanked her for helping contain the threat and told her she might need to come in for a statement later. As the steel fangs were led away in cuffs, the reality of their defeat began to register. Vance shot Caroline a hate-filled glare, but beneath that animosity was a grudging respect he couldn't quite hide. His group had terrorized dozens of small towns, diners, and bars across the state, bullying anyone who got in their way. Yet here they were, bested in a casino by a mere waitress who possessed a skill set they never saw coming. With the bikers secured, the police began sorting through statements, collecting video footage from the casino's security cameras, footage that would almost certainly go viral. Meanwhile, the staff and patrons who had experienced the night's terror tried to piece together how everything had escalated so fast, and how it had ended just as abruptly. Amid all the chatter and commotion, Caroline found herself swarmed by grateful co-workers. Linda hugged her tight, tears glistening in her eyes, thanking her for saving them. Griffin and the other security personnel expressed a mixture of admiration and relief, acknowledging that the situation could have ended far worse without her intervention. Caroline deflected their praise modestly, insisting that she'd only done what was necessary. In truth, she felt an unsettling mix of satisfaction and regret. Satisfaction at having neutralized a genuine threat, regret for having to resort to violence. She had left her SWAT career precisely to escape that cycle. Yet tonight, she discovered that some part of her would always remain vigilant, ready to defend the innocent. As she gazed across the battered casino floor, she clung to one thought. Maybe there was a reason she'd landed this job and been here at the exact time these bikers decided to wreak havoc. Perhaps fate had placed her in a position to ensure that justice, in its rawest form, prevailed, reminding everyone that you could never truly judge a person's strength by their appearance. In the weeks that followed, the Beau Fortune Casino slowly returned to its familiar rhythm of clattering chips and chiming slot machines. Broken furniture was repaired, shattered glass replaced, and the faint memory of that chaotic night faded into casino lore. New rumors sprang up among the regulars. Stories about how a quiet waitress had single-handedly taken on a dozen ruthless bikers. Though each retelling grew more dramatic than the last, the essence remained the same. Never judge a book by its cover. Caroline became an unlikely local legend. Some patrons came specifically hoping to see her, curiosity piqued by social media clips that had circulated. In those grainy, adrenaline-fueled videos, she was a blur of sharp, controlled movements, taking down men twice her size with surgical precision. Whenever a visitor asked if she was that waitress, she'd blush slightly and deny being anything special. But behind the scenes, her life had shifted. The police had taken her statement, verifying her background in law enforcement and tactical operations. Word spread among the officers that the Beau Fortune waitress was an ex-SWAT operative who had chosen to step away from the front lines, likely seeking a quieter existence. Some quietly thanked her for stepping up when they couldn't arrive in time. Others even hinted at job offers or recommended she rejoin the force. She politely declined, content, for now, with her chosen path. The casino's management was torn between gratitude and concern. On one hand, Caroline had saved them from what could have been a devastating event, preventing theft, injuries, or even worse outcomes. On the other, they worried about liability. After lengthy discussions, they decided to keep her on staff and lauded her actions, albeit privately. The official narrative was that an off-duty security consultant had intervened, and that Caroline had acted under that person's guidance. In truth, though, her co-workers all knew the real story, and no one questioned her role. In the quiet after the storm, Caroline found herself reflecting on life choices. She had spent years training to respond with decisive force to any threat. She'd endured harrowing missions, facing down dangerous criminals and life-or-death scenarios. Yet she had reached a point where she yearned for normalcy, a chance to settle in a place where her toughest decision might be whether to serve a new cocktail or stick to the classics. That night with the steel fangs made her realize she could never fully escape her past, but perhaps she could blend it into her present in a way that helped others, without sacrificing her peace of mind. On her days off, she still performed those fluid martial arts stretches in the staff locker room. Only now, a handful of colleagues sometimes joined in, curious to learn from her. She taught them basic self-defense moves, quietly instilling a bit of her SWAT discipline into the casino's everyday routines. If someone new teased her about being an action hero, she'd chuckle and say, "I'm just making sure we're all safe here." Atlantic City soon welcomed the return of carefree tourists, high-stakes gamblers, and curious thrill-seekers. The Steel Fangs, or what remained of them, were scattered, locked behind bars, or hiding in shadows. The city's law enforcement cracked down on other biker gangs too, emboldened by the spotlight that had fallen on the Beau Fortune incident. And as for Carolyn, she continued to serve drinks and greet patrons with that same gentle, steady smile. But now there was a subtle shift in how people viewed her. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a guardian in plain sight, carrying with her the message that one should never underestimate the quiet figure in the corner. Life moved on, yet every so often Caroline would catch the eye of a departing tourist or a colleague clocking out at the end of a shift, and they'd exchange a knowing nod. In that moment, the lesson hung in the air. Respect, unity, and justice were forces stronger than any brute display of power. And somewhere, in the hush that followed the daily clang of slot machines, one could almost hear the echo of Vance's words. "Who the hell are you?" And her unspoken reply, "The person you should have never threatened." Looking back on the tumultuous night at the Beau Fortune Casino, it's clear that sometimes quiet courage can overshadow even the loudest displays of force. By tapping into her SWAT training, Caroline thwarted a dangerous gang and upheld the very values she'd once sworn to protect. Though battered and bruised, she found a renewed sense of purpose in safeguarding innocent lives. From the onlooking crowd's fearful silence to the roar of triumph when law enforcement finally arrived, the story ends on a note of shared gratitude and relief. It's a powerful reminder that no matter our past, we can all choose to stand up for what's right when push comes to shove. If Caroline could do it, so can anyone willing to act for the greater good. How do you feel about her actions? Could she have handled things differently? Let us know in the comments. Your thoughts help us shape even more engaging stories.